Hi guys, it's Prita. It's actually thundering right now as I record this video, so you're probably gonna hear the thunder in the background. I'll try to eliminate it as much as I possibly can, but it's really, really loud. The lightning and the thunder just came at the same time and it was super scary, and I don't know, you know, you get like a shock. Warm up I also just actually had to walk back from class in the rain, so my hair is still drying a little bit, so it's probably gonna poof up to be like this big. So as you can see from the title of this video, I'm going to be telling you guys a little bit about some of my advice for improving your Korean pronunciation. I got a lot of comments on my videos saying, how did you learn Korean? How did you get your pronunciation to be so native-like? And I'm still very far from native pronunciation, but I think there are a couple things that I did that did help me. So in this video, I'm not going to be teaching you guys how to like physically pronounce Hangeul sounds, but if you guys wanted me to, I could make another video on my sort of tips and tricks for ways to do that. I'm not Korean, so I wouldn't be perfect. I hope Korean people will correct me on things on this video. Also, I'm not like a linguistics major or a Korean major, so I'm not 100% sure on all of these things. Please take all of these tips with a grain of salt. I might have made some mistakes along the way, and if you guys notice any mistakes, please feel free to point them out in the comments so that other people can learn and they're not learning the wrong thing. But I hope this proves to be helpful for you guys. So to give you guys some background on how much Korean I actually do know, I'm taking Korean right now, and I've been taking it for about 6 months since I came to Princeton. But before that, I had been into K-pop for about 4 years, and I was learning it from basically dramas and K-pop, and I also learned Hangeul on my own by looking at some like online resources. So I was able to read and write Korean before I started at Princeton, and I think that's something that you guys could also be able to do. If I was more dedicated to learning Korean, I think I probably could have gotten better and maybe have been at a higher level, but I started Korean here at Princeton as level 1 because I knew a lot of vocab and I was good at pronouncing, but I didn't really know grammar rules, so that's why I decided to take it. Also, before I get into the tips and tricks, I wanted to say that there might have just been an innate advantage based on my mother tongue. So my first language was Nepali, which is a language that has a lot of phones. If you guys know Hindi or Urdu, a lot of Sanskrit languages, they have a ton of phones. So I'm going to be using some linguistics terms throughout this video because while I was learning Korean, I was also taking linguistics, and I found that it really helped while I was learning Korean. So I wanted to give these tips to you guys. These pronunciation rules that I'm going to be talking about later on in the video are linguistics based. So these things will probably help you when you're learning. Anyways, the term phone is a linguistics term that means a sound in a language, and it's literally just the sound that you make. So Nepali just has a very large subset of phones compared to some other languages out of the universal set of phones that are available to us as human beings, what sounds we can make. And Hindi also has this, since Hindi and Nepali have like basically the same alphabet. Like literally there are like 4 D sounds, 4 T sounds, 4 like CH, J sounds. So I just have a lot more versatility when I'm trying to match up the sounds that I already know to sounds and languages that I'm trying to learn, since I have a larger subset. But aside from that, there are some things that I did that really did help my pronunciation. So that brings me to tip number 1, which is to watch Korean TV shows, movies, listen to radio broadcasts, listen to the news, listen to an audiobook in Korean, whatever it is. As long as you're doing something that allows you to listen to a native person speaking the language and it's something that you enjoy, I think it would be a really great way to have fun while you're also learning the language. So I know a lot of people think that K-dramas are kind of cheesy, and there are definitely some alternatives to that. Korean movies are like hella sad, let me tell you. Okay, I cry in every single one that I've ever watched. Or you might want to go for some dramas that are not so cheesy, the crime dramas, the medical dramas, the horror dramas. There are a bunch of types, so just steer away from the romance ones. If you're not into the cheesy dramas, basically all romance dramas will have some sort of cheesy moment. It's like hard to kind of avoid that. So tip number 2 is to actually go a little further than just watching or listening to something in Korean. I would advise you guys to like pause the video if you come across a word that you've heard very often you're beginning to recognize. It's also really important that you listen very carefully and note that the Korean sounds are not going to translate exactly to sounds that you already know in your native language. They're going to be a little bit different. I know that a lot of websites that teach you Korean, or maybe YouTube channels that teach you Korean, will will try to say that a certain phone in Korean is very similar to another phone in English, and while that it might be true that they're similar, there's still going to be some differences. So be very careful not to assume that it's exactly like this sound that you already know. So tip number 3, which should really be tip number 1, but it's fine, is to learn Hangeul, because that's how you're going to learn what the Korean sounds actually are, instead of comparing them to sounds that you already know if you're using romanization to learn Korean. If you're constantly using romanization, you're basically telling your brain how to pronounce things in Korean using English sounds, and that's not what you want to do. You want to learn them in Korean. And learning Hangeul really isn't that hard. I think you could feasibly learn it in about a week. There are so many great online resources. I'll probably link some down in the description box if you guys want some recommendations. I did learn Hangeul before I started Korean at Princeton. So from this point on, I'm going to be talking about pronunciation rules, and it's going to require being able to read and write Hangeul. So if you haven't already learned, I would recommend that you pause this video, you take like a week to learn it, and then you come back, and then these tips will be really helpful. Of course, if you're just interested in hearing these things anyways, you can continue watching and then learn it afterwards. So pronunciation rules exist basically to make pronouncing things easier. They're basically changes that make the written form of the word different from the spoken form of the word, because when you're speaking it, you want to make it as easy and fluid as possible. So one thing I want to clarify is the umnida versus the oyo ayo ending form when you use it. The umnida ending is the deferential ending, and the oyo ayo ending is the polite form or the polite ending. When I was learning Korean on my own, I came across like some online sources that said that the umnida ending was more respectful, or what I got from it was that it was more respectful. However, the umnida ending does not equate to respect always in all situations. It's more like formality. So in announcements and when you're talking to somebody who you're not very familiar with, if you're meeting them for the first time, then you would use the umnida ending. However, you want to be respectful with your parents, you want to be respectful with your teachers because they're older than you. However, you're not likely to use that in general with your parents or your teachers because you see them a lot. So you want to still kind of like give this sense of closeness. So the oyo ayo ending is still polite, but it's more familiar, it's more affectionate. If you were to use the umnida ending with your parents, it might suggest attachment or withholding affection, so you would not likely be using that. Of course, none of these things apply to all Korean people. My professors have said that there are some times where the children will address their parents with the umnida ending, and it's more common with the father to son relationship, but in general, it's usually the oyo ayo ending. So finally, we can get to the pronunciation rules. So tip number 4 is about resyllabification. It's a hard word to pronounce. So Korean, like Chinese, is a very syllabic word. The words, when they're written, are written in syllable blocks. So when there's a double consonant, like in the word 읽다, which is the infinitive form of to read, and you conjugate it into the polite form, which is 읽어요, you don't pronounce it as 읽어요, you pronounce it as 읽어요. So basically what happens is that second final consonant is resyllabified. I don't know if that's a word or not, but it's resyllabified so that it moves to the next syllable. So in this word, the kiok is moving to the second syllable so that you're only pronouncing the 를 as the final consonant in the first syllable. Resyllabification will only occur, however, if the second syllable or the following syllable starts with a vowel. And it also occurs in words that don't have double final consonants, like the word 알아요. It is a polite conjugated form of to know. Instead of pronouncing it as 알아요, you pronounce it as 알아요. So the 를 moves to the second syllable. So another pronunciation rule that has to do with double final consonants is the double final consonant weakening. This is especially common in words where the second final consonant is the hiet, and the hiet sound, even in different positions like the initial consonant, tends to get weakened because it's a glottal sound. Glottal sounds are made farther back in your throat than other sounds, so it's a little bit harder to move from a glottal sound to another sound that is produced more forward in your mouth. So for example, in the word 많아요, which is the polite form of to be many, it is an adjective that is conjugated. Adjectives and verbs in Korean are very different from the way that you use them in English. So the word 많아요, the hiet is not pronounced at all. it sounds like 많아요. So you might notice that resyllabification also occurs in this word because the second syllable is a vowel. So you do 많아요, and you don't hear the 히읗 sound at all because it's weakened by the much stronger 니은 sound. And the same thing happens in the word 싫어요, which is the polite form of tate. The H is weakened and the 르 sound moves over to the second syllable, so you have 싫어요. 싫어요. So consonant weakening can also happen in double final consonants that aren't 히읗. So in the word 여덟, which is the native Korean word for 8, there is no syllable that comes after the double consonants, so there's no way to do resyllabification. So what happens is that the piup is weakened by the stronger 르 sound, so that you don't pronounce the piup at all. So you just say 여덟. There's no piup in there. From this example, you might assume that it's always the second final consonant that gets weakened. However, that's not always the case. There are certain phones in Korean that are much stronger than other ones. So tip number 6 is my last one, and it's called assimilation, which is a really broad pronunciation rule that's very common in basically all languages. Assimilation is making a phone more similar to a neighboring phone by changing the placement. So for example, you might have noticed this in the word 감사합니다, which is the deferential form of thank you. So although there is a piup in the spelling, you don't actually pronounce 감사합니다. You pronounce it 감사합니다 because of nasal assimilation. So what happens is that the piup changes to a mian because the next sound is a nian. The B sound changes to an M sound because the next sound is an N sound. The N and the M sounds, the miam and the nian, are two nasal consonants, which means that your nasal passage is opened when you make these sounds. Since the piup and the mian are both bilabial sounds, which are made by putting your lips together, that's why the piup changes to a miam instead of any other sound that's a nasal sound as well. It's similar to the original sound, but it's also similar to the neighboring sound. And it changes to a nasal consonant because you are preparing for the next sound that you are going to make, and it just makes it so much easier. If you think about it, 감사합니다, 감사합니다 is so much harder to pronounce than 감사합니다, you know? You'll also notice that Koreans, when they're speaking very fast, will say 감사합니다 instead of 감사합니다 because of what we learned, which is the 히읗 weakening. It's just a really hard sound to pronounce because it's a glottal sound, so it tends to be weakened in words like 감사합니다. So instead, what you do is kind of make the ah sound a little bit longer, elongate it, so it's 감사합니다, 감사합니다. Another common type of assimilation is the assimilation of a nian to a rir, which is the N to an R sound. For example, in the word 연락, which is the noun contact, like a contact in your phone, although it's spelled with a nian, when you pronounce it, the nian changes to a rir because you're trying to anticipate the next sound, which is a rir as well. It's not always the case that the assimilation will change the sound exactly to the next neighboring sound. Sometimes it'll change just to a sound that's very similar. For example, in 감사합니다, it doesn't change the piup to a nian, it changes it to a miam. But in this case, the N changes to an L in order to anticipate the next L sound. So instead of saying 연락, you say 연락, which makes it so much easier to pronounce. So the last type of assimilation I'll cover in this video is place assimilation, when a certain sound changes in order to become more similar in the place of articulation to its neighboring sounds. And this is especially common in final consonants because Korean has a lot of consonants that could be used as final consonants, but only certain ones are actually pronounced. The chiit sound, which is very similar to the ch sound in English, is used sometimes as a final consonant, but there is almost never a time where you will actually pronounce the ch sound at the end of a syllable. So for example, with the word 꽃, which is flower, you do not pronounce the chiit at the end. You don't pronounce it as 꽃, you pronounce it as 꽃, so it turns in sort of to like a T sound. However, if you did have a syllable after that, that was a vowel, for example, 꽃이, which is just with the particle added to it, you would then pronounce the chiit only because of resyllabification, so that it turns into 꽃이, 꽃이. So there are a lot of other pronunciation rules in Korean, and I just don't have the time to talk about all of them, and there's a lot of different ways that they are applied. So instead, I'll probably link some sources in the description box that you guys can check out to learn how to use these when you're reading Korean and learning how to pronounce these words that you don't already know. So those are all the rules that I will cover, all the tips that I will cover in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this was helpful. And if you guys have any more questions that I could possibly answer, I will try to answer them. You can ask them in the comments or you can ask them in my Ask FM. And yeah, I'll see you guys soon. All right, bye!